Today, we're going to take a really close look at some of the heaviest states we can experience. You know the ones, hopelessness, and a couple of its close cousins. What are they really made of? Let's dissect their anatomy.
So let's start with a big question, one that gets right to the heart of it. We tend to think of hopelessness or futility or doubt as just really, really powerful emotions, right? We say, I feel hopeless. But is that the whole story? Are they just our regular feelings, but with the volume cranked all the way up to 11?
Or, and this is the core idea we're exploring, are they something else entirely? Something like hybrids, these compound states that aren't just one thing, but live in that fascinating, kind of murky borderland between a pure feeling and a pure thought. Okay, so to really get our heads around these hybrid states, we have to go back to basics. We've got to get super clear on the building blocks first, and that means drawing some sharp lines between three things we often lump together: emotion, feeling, and thought. Think of this as separating our raw ingredients. Over on the left, you've got primary emotions. These are raw, physical reactions. They are incredibly fast, they happen in the body, and they're built to make us do something. Then on the right, you've got thoughts. They work on a totally different level. They're slower, they're interpretive, they're all about the mind trying to make meaning out of everything.
Let's dig into those primary emotions a little more. We're talking about things like fear, anger, grief, joy. They hit you in a flash. You feel them physically. Your heart races, your jaw clenches. And here's the key part. When nothing gets in their way, they're actually designed to move through us pretty quickly. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So what's a feeling in this model? Well, a feeling is basically the bridge. It's our conscious brain catching up to what the body is already doing. It's that moment of awareness where your mind goes, oh, okay, this tightness in my chest, this is sadness. It's the subjective sensing of that raw primary emotion. And this, right here, is where it gets really, really interesting. What happens when that raw emotion doesn't get to finish its journey? What happens when a thought, and specifically a conclusion, gets glued onto it? Well, that fusion is what creates these things we're calling secondary affective states. These are the compound formations we're zeroing in on. They pop up when a primary emotion gets stalled out and our meaning-making brain just wraps a whole story or a final conclusion around it, hardening it into something that feels permanent.
Okay, enough theory. Let's put this into practice and see how it works. Our first case study, we're going to dissect the anatomy of hopelessness.
So here's the recipe. The primary emotion that's usually bubbling under the surface of hopelessness is grief, sometimes with a little fear mixed in. But the thing that makes it hopelessness, that's the cognitive overlay. It's the firm, rock-solid conclusion, nothing will change. The result isn't just grief anymore. It's grief that's been trapped and sealed off by this interpretive closure. And this quote just says it all perfectly. Let's really let it sink in. Hopelessness is not an emotion. It's a conclusion, a final verdict that we've stamped onto an emotion, freezing it in place and projecting it out into forever.
Okay, next up, futility. Now this one is sneaky, because a lot of the time it masquerades as wisdom, like you're just being a realist.
When you look under the hood, futility is usually built on a foundation of exhaustion or grief or maybe even anger that's been squashed down. The cognitive overlay here is a very specific belief about cause and effect. My effort makes absolutely no difference. So a raw emotion gets translated into a universal law about how the world works.
I love this quote. Futility has a round bottom. Just picture that for a second. Try to stand something up that has no flat base. You can't. It just rolls over. And that's exactly what futility does. It completely disables our agency, our ability to even try to stand up and act.
And our final state to dissect is doubt. Now, this one seems like the most heady of the three. It really feels like it's just a thinking problem. But as we're about to see, it's got a hidden emotional engine.
So the primary emotion fueling doubt is almost always fear, and sometimes a little bit of shame. But here's the trick. Instead of feeling that fear in your body, the racing heart, the tight stomach, it gets rerouted. The energy of that fear gets displaced straight into your head. It becomes that endless loop of questions, that back and forth, that paralysis by analysis.
And this is the absolute key takeaway here. Doubt is just fear wearing a thought problem costume. And that is precisely why you can never think your way out of it. Trying to solve doubt with more thinking is like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. The root of the problem isn't cognitive, it's emotional.
So, we've seen what these states are. Now we need to talk about what they do.
And the number one consequence of all three is the collapse of our agency, our fundamental ability to act in the world.
And here's the trap. Hopelessness, futility, doubt, they don't show up feeling like problems. They feel like profound insights. They feel like you've finally seen the real truth, that you're just being realistic and clear-eyed about the situation.
But that feeling of having a deep insight is totally deceptive, because in reality, their function is the exact opposite of insight. They function as closures. They shut down possibility. They end the conversation. They bring the entire movement of experience to a dead stop.
So how exactly do they kill our agency? Well, first, they collapse the margin. They shrink the space where anything new or different could possibly happen. Second, they lock the channel. They force you into one single, narrow story. And finally, they contract your presence, yanking you out of the living, breathing moment and sticking you in a rigid, conceptual prison.
So, is there a different way to look at all this? Absolutely. The most powerful shift we can make is to stop seeing these states as final verdicts about reality and start seeing them as signals about our own internal process.
Let's be crystal clear on this point. Hopelessness is not some fundamental building block of the universe. Futility is not a law of physics. Doubt is not the ultimate truth. They are not primary experiences.
What they are, instead, is signals. They're like smoke alarms. They're going off to tell you that somewhere a primary experience, like grief or fear or anger, has been blocked or trapped or denied. They aren't a final judgment on the world. They are a signpost pointing back to a place inside of you where life's natural emotional flow got stuck. And seeing them as signals instead of verdicts, well, that changes everything.